So maybe if we could now have our people who spoke come up to the panel, and we'll ask if anybody has any questions, and if you do, ideally come up to a microphone so people can hear you. And if there's no questions yet, I'll actually start with one maybe. You know, one of the things we heard from Rob and from Jeremy was that with NET, the really mission was phase 3 trials. But what we see with Hobbit is the door open to, I have a great idea, and the trial's outcome should be, what's the probability that a phase 3 trial would be successful, right? And so, which is really, that's really opening a very big door potentially. I'd love to hear more discussion of both from maybe Rob and from Jeremy. Are you guys really looking for more people to bring to you? I have an idea, but it hasn't had a completed phase 2 trial yet. And really the trial is this a good idea that has legs to go on?
Sure. So that's a very interesting question. Well, okay, it's good. So the outcome for the Hobbit trial is really, as you said, really fascinating. And I don't know of other examples. I simply don't know. But the NIH is a very big place, and I'm a very small fish. Maybe even an Arctic grayling. So I don't know, but it's really a very, very interesting question. But I would like to sort of use that as an opportunity to tell you something about this question of what's going to work in a phase 3 trial. So for many, many years, NIH was funding clinical trials that didn't really go anywhere in terms of even being able to complete the work that they'd set out. Not that the answer was negative, that the outcome didn't work, which is, as Rob so eloquently put it, that's a very good finding. You need to know what works and what doesn't work. But the trial simply wasn't enrolling enough patients. They were never going to get to where they wanted. And they took a great deal of money, and the trial ended in what we could all agree was failure. Failure to even get to an answer. And that's why, for instance, NHLBI recently instituted this UG3-UH3 mechanism, meaning if you want to come to NHLBI with a question, a clinical trial, the first thing they're going to say to you is, okay, even if we love the idea, do not go ahead and do that clinical trial. We're going to give you a UG3, which is basically a 1 or 2 years, to maybe enroll a few patients, work out the kinks, come back to us, show us you can do it, and then we go to the next phase. And that's U34s have a similar idea to them. There's too much at stake here to simply jump in, and we're going to give you $17 million to figure this out. From my own experience, I had an R01 looking at the effect of tamsulosin on patients with renal colic, and I had a multi-center. This was back in 2005. There was going to be a 3-site trial, and it was funded by NADDK, and they said to me, okay, we're funding your R01. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make it into a U01 because we want us to have some input. We're from the government, and we're here to help. That's what they told me. And then once it was U01, they said, okay, but now we want you to do a pilot study. And so we want you to prove to us that you can do the study, which is fairly reasonable, right? It's a fairly reasonable thing to do. If you're asking for $4 million, we want to know you can do the study. So I did the pilot study under the U01 mechanism, and then NIDDK said, great, you've shown us you can do it. Now we want you to spend another year on having a U34 to plan out the main grant. And I scratched my head and I said, wait a minute, but I just did that. The whole thing is set. That's the study. Let's do it. And they said, no, we want you to do a U34. So we sucked it up. We got another NIH grant. We did a U34, which is essentially planning the stuff that I planned in the first place. And then we finally were allowed to do it, which perhaps explains why the initial study was proposed in 2005, and the final paper on the outcome was given here at SAEM in 2018. So that was 13 years later. But so as I said, the arc of NIH bends long, but it does bend eventually to the right clinical answers. So why do we have all these planning mechanisms and UG3s, and why don't we just let people go? The answer is there was a track record of clinical trials not getting to that stage. And so with the taxpayers' money and the millions of dollars of taxpayer money that we're giving out, we want to be really sure that you've got the infrastructure set up and you've got the question asked in the right way, and then we'll let you go. And so I think we'd like to see more of this, more of these very well-designed phase 2 trials that will then allow us to go into a phase 3 with our eyes open and not just jump into a phase 3 when we really weren't quite there yet. So a fascinating question, long answer, but it really, I think, explains why we're doing this in a slow way.
Yeah, there are other mechanisms too for ideas like platform trials. For example, we might, as investigators, have several ideas in a particular disease, but not quite sure which one is the one to bring forward for a big network trial. We haven't had great success in getting that kind of platform ever funded, but there's been great interest in, if we hit the right recipe for doing a buffet of different interventions and then finding which one we want to take forward for a phase 3 trial. In the resuscitation consortium, our biggest limitation, I think, was the pipeline. It was really constrained to do only large phase 3 trials, and there were not things that had been well vetted in the phase 2 space, and I use that broadly, but had not, had enough ground testing before you went and tried to do it in 10,000 patients, because it is a huge investment to do it in 10,000, and you can't modify that on the fly. You want to have worked out those bugs early on.
Go ahead.
And I think the trick about the learning space is learning how to use the learning space well, right? So the problem was, in your experience, was that they created phase 2 and planning things that were hoops. They were just barriers, right? They didn't actually help you do the study, right? So using the phase 2 space to help you learn how to do the study is actually more challenging than what has traditionally been happening, which is using the phase 2 space to see if you're serious, right? And if you can persevere, and so many of the phase 2 trials that were being brought to NINDS were underpowered phase 3 trials because they were told that they weren't ready to do a phase 3 trial. So they gave a small phase 3 trial. They couldn't do anything, didn't really learn anything. And it was just a stepping stone. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, I think that people are resistant to phase 2 trials because it's so often been a hoop or a stepping stone and not been what it really needs to be, which is a space to answer the questions you need to answer in order to do the right larger trial. And sometimes that means that the phase 2 trials are going to be larger than we have traditionally done in the past. They might need to be more innovative, but somehow we have to figure out how to use the learning space to learn what we need to know and not have it be just obligatory.
Yeah, and I think the Hoba trial is actually a perfect example of that, because the initial Hoba trial idea was brought to us as help us design a phase 3 trial for hyperbaric oxygen for severe traumatic brain injury, right?
That had failed.
That had failed going through peer review many times. Right. So we looked at this and said, there are really some important questions that aren't answered that we need to learn. And one is, if you're going to do a phase 3 trial, what hyperbaric regimen are you going to use? Or to make it a drug trial, what dose are you going to use? So many trials, they do the study and they get a dose and it's like, oh, we failed. Shoot, we should have used a higher dose. And they didn't explore it completely. So this was really part of the reason for that. I think two really good reasons to do a phase 3 trial in a network like SIREN. One is if it's an idea that is an impactful idea, it's really important, it's something that could go a long way, and what you're trying to learn is just to key in on the parameters you really need to do the phase 3 trial. And that's really the way Hoba was set up. And there are really two main things with Hoba. One was, what's the dose of hyperoxia that you need to give? What's the best dose to take forward to a phase 3? But really the other part of it, and this gets to Jeremy's thing, it was a feasibility thing, because the study section said, we don't know if you can pull this off. We know there's 2 sites that can do it, but can you do it at 14 or 15 sites? And so this is really 2 very important hurdles to jump over in a phase 2 trial. And if we successfully jump over them, we'll go to a phase 3, but it is leading directly to that. And even the primary outcome of being a greater than 50% probability of success in a phase 3. So those are, I think, the kind of phase 2 learning trials that we want to have in SIREN, more than the ones like Rob said that are basically underpowered phase 3 trials that we're doing this in 100 patients even though we really need 700 to answer the question, and hey, we did it, but we didn't necessarily learn anything.
So it sounds like it's very reasonable for people in this audience who might have an interesting idea, but haven't yet completed a phase 2 trial that has a positive outcome, to come to you and with a dose-finding trial or a what would be the right design for a phase 3 trial, and this is the trial to find that out trial, and that SIREN would be interested and supportive, and is that correct?
I think within reason. I mean, I think we're not interested in doing really, really early phase 2 trials.
Got it.
Or, is this really safe to use in humans?
So not the I invented a compound. Let's start it. Let's start trying it. Kind of study.
No first in human studies, please.
Okay. Great. And next one, couple more, maybe 2 more questions. This interesting question of registry-based randomized trials, and so you raised this question of using, American College of Surgery data or the American Heart Association data. Do you have an example of a trial where that's either been done or that you had in mind that you might do, like just to get our heads around what would you do with using the some enormous data?
An example of a trial that's been done that could have been done,
Great.
And that would be the crash trial. I think would be a good one that you could have done as a registry-based randomized clinical trial using the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma database. Yeah, go ahead.
So, that was TXA versus not TXA, that crash trial. For did you require more transfusion? Did you survive your surgery? Did you survive the hospitalization? What those registries are generally not good for is longer-term outcomes. So when we've looked at some of our ideas to say, is a chest pain trial, could we just use the Get With the Guidelines registry from American Heart to track these chest pain patients? Turns out no, because there's not good follow-up or data after that patient leaves the index hospitalization. So you really don't know with high you only know with high missingness like what happens after the first 5 or 6 days. So there are things where, but if you really just wanted to know live dead from the hospital visit, these registries are actually a very cheap way to get all your outcomes.
Great, thank you. All right, maybe one more question, and if not, then we will finish up. Thank you guys very much.